Welcome back to Reddit Whispers. My ex told me she hung out with a bunch of men instead of going to church. Sorry if it's a bit messy, writing my jumbled thoughts RN. I was with my ex for a total of 2 years. It started off decent but became more toxic and full of lies after a while. She started showing her true color, but I was just happy I had my first girlfriend and would let her walk all over me. Every argument we had where she wronged me ended with me apologizing. One day she came up to me crying and told me she's been hiding something. She told me that went to church she saw a bunch of her church guy friend and went to hang out with them. After that she left with them and hung out with their all-boy group. She was the only girl among 10 plus men. She went AFK for about 5 hours. At the time she just told me her church is hectic that day as it had an event and phones were turned off. When she told me she lied about the event and that she actually just hung out with dudes all day, she didn't tell me what happened and just said they hung out, and I took her word as is, never deeping why she was crying about it and had hid it for a month. But at the time, I didn't even think cheating was a possibility. But recently, the memory flash banged into my head. She lied to me saying it was a church event when really she went to hang out with a bunch of dudes, so why did she have to turn her phone off for hours? A movie, or, and it's further solidifying to me at least that she hid the whole thing for a month and only told me out of guilt, with no specifications. Why feel guilt to the point of tears? At the time I didn't think it, but I believe she may have had a sexual rendezvous. Or maybe something way lighter that she still felt too guilty of that she couldn't keep it to herself as it ate her up. Safe to say few months later I snapped back into reality and realized she ain't it and left. 2 years. It's funny how a length of time can feel like both a lifetime and a blink of an eye. 2 years I gave to her, to us, to what I thought was the beginning of my forever. It all started so decently. That's the word for it, decent. Not a whirlwind romance, not a dramatic movie script love story, but a comfortable, easy beginning that felt like settling into a warm bath. I was 19, she was 18. I'd never had a proper girlfriend before. I'd had crushes, fumbled through a few awkward dates that went nowhere, but I'd never had someone to call mine, someone to text good night to, someone whose hand felt like it was made to fit in mine. And then came Sarah. She was in one of my sociology classes, always sat 3 rows ahead and 2 seats to the left. She had this way of chewing on the end of her pen when she was concentrating that I found ridiculously endearing. I spent a month just watching her, building up the courage to say something more than a mumbled "excuse me" as I squeezed past her to get to my seat. The day I finally did it, my heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I asked her about the reading assignment, a question I already knew the answer to, and her smile when she turned to answer me. It was like the sun coming out from behind a cloud. It lit up her whole face, made her eyes sparkle. We started talking after that, walking to the campus coffee shop, studying together in the library. It was all so new to me, so exciting. The first time I held her hand, my palm was so sweaty I was terrified she'd pull away in disgust. But she didn't. She just squeezed it tighter and smiled that smile. That was the hook, that simple validation. I wasn't just the quiet guy in the back of the class anymore. I was the guy holding Sarah's hand. And for a while, that was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything. The first 6 months were a blur of firsts. Our first real date at a cheap Italian restaurant. Our first kiss under a streetlight that flickered like a dying star. The first time she told me she loved me. Her voice a soft whisper in the dark of my dorm room. I was so utterly besotted, so completely consumed by the sheer novelty of being in a relationship, that I didn't notice the subtle shifts. I was just so grateful, so happy to finally have my first girlfriend, that I put her on a pedestal she hadn't earned. I saw her not as she was, but as the embodiment of an idea, the answer to a loneliness I hadn't even fully acknowledged until she was there. And because I was so desperate to keep her, to keep this feeling alive, I let things slide. The first time it happened, it was small. We had plans to go to a movie, something I'd been looking forward to all week. An hour before we were supposed to meet, she texted me. "So sorry, something came up with my family, can we reschedule?" I was disappointed, of course, but I replied with "no problem, hope everything's okay," without a second thought. Later that night, I was scrolling through Instagram and saw a picture her friend had posted. There was Sarah in the background at a party, laughing with a drink in her hand. There was no family emergency. There was just a better offer. When I brought it up the next day, my voice was hesitant, apologetic even. I didn't want to seem accusatory. She immediately got defensive. "Oh my God, it wasn't a big deal," she said, rolling her eyes. "My cousin's friend was having a get-together. It was super last minute. I didn't want you to feel bad." And then came the classic maneuver, the one that would become her signature move, the flip. "I can't believe you were spying on me. Do you not trust me? Why are you trying to start a fight?" My confusion and hurt were quickly replaced by a wave of guilt. Was I spying? Was I untrusting? Was I the one causing the problem? Before I knew it, I was the one apologizing. "I'm sorry, you're right, I shouldn't have doubted you. I was just looking forward to seeing you." It was a pattern that repeated itself with increasing frequency. Every argument, no matter how legitimate my grievance, ended with me apologizing for my feelings. She would criticize my friends, calling them immature or boring, and when I'd defend them, I was accused of choosing them over her. So I'd apologize and see my friends less. She would make promises and break them, and when I'd express my disappointment, I was being too needy or demanding. So I'd apologize and learn to expect less. I became an expert in swallowing my own feelings, in prioritizing her comfort over my own truth. I was so afraid of the conflict, so terrified of losing her and being plunged back into that quiet loneliness, that I allowed her to reshape my reality. Her version of events always became the official version. My perception was always flawed, my emotions always an overreaction. I was the one who was too sensitive, too jealous, too insecure. I was the problem. She was just reacting to my flaws, and I believed it. I believed it because the alternative was too terrifying to contemplate, that the person I loved didn't respect me, that the relationship I was clinging to so desperately was a toxic, one-sided affair. So I let her walk all over me. I became a doormat with a heartbeat, a boy so grateful for the crumbs of affection she threw my way that I convinced myself it was a feast. She started showing her true colors, but I was colorblind, willfully ignoring the deep, bloody reds of the flags she was waving. Her relationship with her faith was one of the things I initially admired about her. She went to church every Sunday. It seemed to ground her, to give her a sense of community. I wasn't particularly religious myself, but I respected her devotion. It seemed pure, a part of her that was untouched by the manipulative games she played with me. Our Sundays developed a rhythm. She'd go to the morning service and I'd meet her afterwards for brunch. She'd come out of the old stone building, her face serene, and tell me about the sermon or the people she'd chatted with. It felt like her sacred time, and I never intruded on it. I saw it as a good thing, a sign of her character. Looking back now, I see it was just another stage, another costume she could put on. One particular Sunday, I remember feeling a strange sense of unease. There was no reason for it. The morning was bright and sunny, and we had plans to go for a hike after our usual brunch. She left for church just like any other week, giving me a quick kiss at the door. "See you at noon," she'd said, but noon came and went. I texted her. No reply. 1 o'clock, still nothing. I called. It went straight to voicemail. Now a small flicker of annoyance started to mix with the unease. This was unusual. Even if the service ran long, she'd always send a quick text. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe her phone died. Maybe there was a special event and they were all asked to turn their phones off. I kept telling myself that, repeating it like a mantra. I didn't want to be the crazy, insecure boyfriend, so I waited. 2 o'clock. 3 o'clock. The sun started to dip lower in the sky, our hiking plans dissolving with the daylight. The annoyance was now a cold, hard knot of worry in my stomach. Was she okay? Did something happen? My mind started to race through horrible possibilities: a car accident, a medical emergency. I was about to start calling hospitals when my phone buzzed. It was her. "Hey, so sorry. Church was super hectic today. They had a special fellowship event and we had to have our phones off. Just finished. On my way to you now." The relief was so immediate and overwhelming that it washed away all the anger and worry. She was okay. There was a perfectly reasonable explanation. Of course there was. "No problem, glad you're okay," I texted back, my fingers flying across the screen. When she finally arrived, nearly 5 hours after she was supposed to meet me, she seemed flushed and a little flustered. She repeated the story about the hectic event, the potluck, the guest speaker, the no phones rule. I soaked it all up, eager to believe, eager for everything to be normal again. I hugged her, told her it was fine, and never questioned a single word. I was just so happy she was there, so relieved that my dark thoughts had been for nothing. I didn't question why a church event would require 5 hours of complete radio silence. I didn't question the slight tremor in her hands or the way she couldn't quite meet my eyes. I didn't question it because I had trained myself not to. My role was to be understanding, to be the easygoing boyfriend. My role was to believe her, and for a month that's exactly what I did. I buried that strange Sunday, filed it away as a non-event, another small sacrifice in the grand project of keeping Sarah happy, of keeping us alive. Life went on, our toxic dance continuing its familiar steps. But that day had planted a seed, a tiny, dormant seed of doubt that was just waiting for the right conditions to finally, devastatingly bloom. That month was a strange sort of limbo, an exercise in willed ignorance. The memory of that weird Sunday with its 5 hours of silence was like a stone in my shoe. I could feel it, a persistent, dull ache, but I chose to walk on it, to ignore the discomfort rather than stop and deal with what was causing it. On the surface, things went back to what passed for normal in our relationship. We went to classes, we ate cheap pizza in my dorm, we argued about something stupid, and I inevitably apologized. But underneath, the dynamic had shifted in a way I couldn't articulate. She was different. Sometimes she was overly affectionate, clinging to me, peppering me with compliments and I love yous with a frantic energy that felt less like love and more like a performance. She'd surprise me with my favorite coffee or suggest we do something she knew I loved, things she usually dismissed as boring. In those moments, I would feel a surge of hope. Maybe we were turning a corner. Maybe she was finally appreciating me. I mistook her guilt for affection, her penance for progress. I was a drowning man mistaking an anchor for a life raft. Other times, she was impossibly distant, a ghost in the room with me. She'd stare at her phone for hours, a small, secretive smile playing on her lips as she texted, and if I asked who she was talking to, she'd snap. Just a friend, God, can't I have any privacy? The wall between us would go up, thick and impenetrable, and I'd be left on the outside, feeling like a stranger in my own relationship. I walked on eggshells, constantly trying to gauge her mood, to be the version of myself that wouldn't set her off. The easygoing boyfriend. The understanding boyfriend. The not needy boyfriend. It was exhausting. I was losing myself, my personality sanding down into a smooth, inoffensive pebble designed to cause as little friction as possible in her life. The lie about the church event festered. It was the unspoken thing between us, the ghost at the feast. I didn't bring it up because I was terrified of her reaction, terrified of being called jealous or controlling. I had been so thoroughly conditioned to see my own instincts as character flaws that I no longer trusted them. My gut was screaming that something was wrong, but her voice in my head was louder, telling me I was crazy. Then came the day it all fell apart. It was a Tuesday, I remember that. It was gray and drizzling outside, the kind of weather that seeps into your bones and makes you feel melancholy. We were in her apartment, supposed to be studying for midterms. The air was thick with unspoken tension. She'd been quiet all day, jumpy and on edge. I kept trying to break the silence, making stupid jokes, offering to make tea, but every attempt was met with a monosyllabic response. Finally, she closed her textbook with a snap that made me jump. She was looking at her hands, twisting a loose thread on her sweater, and then she started to cry. It wasn't a few quiet tears. It was a full-blown breakdown, a storm of ragged, heaving sobs that seemed to be torn from the deepest part of her. My immediate reaction was a familiar one, panic and a frantic mental search for what I might have done wrong. "Sarah, what is it? What's wrong?" I moved towards her, reaching out to comfort her, but she flinched away. "Don't," she choked out between sobs. "I'm so sorry." My mind was a blank. Sorry for what? For being upset, for not studying. I couldn't connect the dots. Sorry for what? Talk to me. Whatever it is, we can fix it. She shook her head, her whole body trembling. "You don't understand. I've been hiding something from you." The The cold knot that had been in my stomach since that Sunday 5 weeks ago tightened. I knew with a sudden sickening certainty what this was about. She took a deep, shuddering breath and finally looked at me. Her eyes were red-rimmed and filled with a desperate, self-loathing guilt. "That Sunday a month ago," she started, her voice barely a whisper. "The day I was late, I lied to you." I just stared at her, my heart starting to pound a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. I said nothing, waiting for the rest of it. "There was no church event," she continued, the words tumbling out in a rush as if she couldn't hold them in any longer. "I went to church, that part was true, but when I got there I saw some of my old friends from the youth group, guy friends." She emphasized the word guy, her eyes searching my face for a reaction. "We all decided to hang out. We left church and just hung out." Still, I was silent. My mind was trying to process the information, trying to fit it into the narrative I had built for myself. She lied, okay, that hurt. But it wasn't the end of the world. My primary feeling was still a twisted kind of concern for her. Seeing her this upset was gut-wrenching, and my instinct, honed over 2 years of our relationship, was to make it stop. I wanted to smooth it over, to tell her it was okay, to absolve her of her guilt so that we could go back to the comfortable, if toxic, status quo. "So you hung out with some friends?" I asked, my voice sounding distant and hollow even to my own ears. "Why did you feel like you had to lie about that?" Her face crumpled again. "Because it wasn't just a few friends. It was a lot of them. It was their whole group, and I was the only girl." She said it like a confession to a murder. "There were like 10 of them, maybe more. And we just went to one of their houses and hung out all day." The image flashed in my mind, her the only girl in a house with over 10 guys, a group of guys I'd never met, never even heard of, and her phone had been off for 5 hours. The stone in my shoe was suddenly a shard of glass. But even then, even with all the pieces laid out in front of me, I couldn't or wouldn't put them together. The possibility of cheating was a foreign concept, a storyline from a movie, not something that could happen in my life with my girlfriend. I was a good boyfriend, I was loyal, I was understanding. People didn't cheat on people like me, did they? My brain refused to make the leap, it clung to the most benign explanation possible. "Okay," I said slowly, my voice betraying none of the turmoil inside me. "Okay, so you hung out with some guy friends. You should have just told me, Sarah." I would have been fine with it. I was lying to her and to myself. I wouldn't have been fine with it, not with the radio silence, not with that many guys. I would have been jealous and insecure, and she would have called me jealous and insecure, and we would have had a fight, and I would have apologized. But in that moment, all I wanted was to stop her crying. I took her word as is. I didn't deep it. I didn't ask the questions that were screaming in the back of my mind. Questions like, what do you do when you hang out with 10 guys for 5 hours? Why did you have to turn your phone off? If it was so innocent, why hide it for a month? And most importantly, why was she crying with this level of soul-crushing guilt over just hanging out with some friends? Her guilt was a confession, but I wasn't listening to its language. I was only listening to her words, the carefully curated version of the story she was feeding me. She didn't offer any more specifics about what they did that day. She just kept repeating, "We hung out, and I'm so sorry I lied." And I let her. I accepted the bare-bones story because digging any deeper would have meant confronting a truth I wasn't ready for. I didn't want to know why she was crying about it. I just wanted it to be over, so I did what I always did. I comforted her. I pulled her into a hug, stroked her hair, and told her it was okay. I told her I forgave her for lying. I became once again the absorber of her negative emotions, the fixer of her self-inflicted crises. I took her guilt and her lies and I packed them away, telling myself that her confession was a sign of her love for me, a testament to our bond. She cared so much that she couldn't bear to keep a secret from me. I framed it as an act of intimacy, a painful but necessary moment of honesty that would make us stronger. I was a fool. Her confession wasn't for me. It wasn't about cleansing the space between us. It was a purely selfish act, a way for her to offload the burden of her guilt so she could feel better about herself. She used me as her emotional dumping ground, and I knelt down and thanked her for the privilege. We never spoke of it again. We fell back into our routine, but the foundation of our relationship, already rotten, had been fractured beyond repair. I had chosen blissful ignorance over a terrifying truth, and in doing so I had sealed our fate. The end was coming. I just didn't know it yet. The months following the confession were a slow, agonizing decay. We were like a dead tree that was still standing, looking solid from a distance, but hollowed out and rotting from the inside, just waiting for a strong wind to knock it over. The confession, which I had naively hoped would be a cleansing moment, a chance to rebuild on a more honest foundation, was actually the opposite. It was a poison that seeped into everything. Knowing she was capable of such a significant, month-long deception changed the way I saw her, even if I was consciously trying to deny it. I started noticing things I'd previously ignored, my brain subconsciously cataloging inconsistencies and suspicious behaviors. Little things, mostly. The way she'd angle her phone away from me when she was texting. Vague answers about where she'd been or who she was with. Last-minute changes of plans with flimsy excuses that echoed the one she'd used before the movie night lie. Each instance was a tiny cut, a micro-betrayal that I would rationalize and explain away, but the cumulative effect was a slow bleeding out of trust. Our arguments became more frequent and more vicious. The established dynamic, where she was always the victim and I was always the apologetic perpetrator, intensified. Now she had a new weapon in her arsenal, my forgiveness. Anytime I would bring up a new hurt, a new disappointment, she would throw the confession back in my face. "I can't believe you're still not trusting me after I was completely honest with you," she'd say, her voice dripping with indignation. "I told you the truth about that day. I cried my eyes out to you, and this is how you repay me." By being jealous and paranoid. It was masterful manipulation. She had turned her lie into a shield. By confessing to a lesser crime, the lie itself, she had inoculated herself against any suspicion of a greater one. And by forgiving her, I had apparently signed away my right to ever question her again. I felt trapped. I was walking on a tightrope, desperately trying to maintain my balance while she was below me, shaking the rope and telling me it was my fault for being so unsteady. The toxicity was no longer a background radiation. It was a choking smog that I was breathing in every single day. I felt perpetually exhausted, anxious, and small. The joy I had once felt in the relationship was long gone, replaced by a grim sense of obligation and a fear of being alone. I had invested 2 years of my life, my entire romantic experience, into this person. Leaving felt like admitting failure, like admitting that the person I had given my heart to was not who I thought she was. It was easier to keep trying, to keep hoping that the decent girl from the beginning would reappear, than to face the reality that she had probably never existed in the first place. The breaking point, the flashbang as I call it, didn't come during a fight. It didn't come from a new lie or another broken promise. It came on a perfectly ordinary Wednesday afternoon. I was sitting in the campus library, trying to write a paper on behavioral psychology, of all things. I was reading about cognitive dissonance, about the mental stress a person experiences when they hold two or more contradictory beliefs or values at the same time. The textbook example was about a smoker who knows smoking is bad for them but continues to do it, justifying it by saying it helps them relax. And then it hit me. It wasn't a gentle dawning of realization. It was a violent, blinding flash of light that illuminated every dark corner of the last 2 years. A flashbang. In that instant, I wasn't in the library anymore. I was back in her apartment watching her cry, listening to her confess. But I was hearing it with new ears, seeing it with new eyes. The dissonance I had been living with for months, the contradiction between the story she told and the guilt she displayed, suddenly resolved itself with terrifying clarity. Every excuse I had made for her, every benefit of the doubt I had given, evaporated. All that was left was the cold, hard truth of the questions I had been too afraid to ask. Why lie about a church event? The answer was no longer because she was afraid I'd be jealous. The answer was because the truth was so much worse than a simple hangout. You don't construct a detailed, preemptive lie about a hectic church event to cover for a platonic afternoon with friends. You construct that lie to create a 5-hour, untraceable, uncontactable black hole in your day. You create that lie to cover up something you know is a fundamental betrayal. And the phone, my God, the phone, that was the detail that now screamed the loudest. So why did she have to turn her phone off for hours, for 5 hours? I started running through the scenarios in my head, but this time without my naive filter. A movie. A movie doesn't last 5 hours. And even if it did, people turn their phones on silent. They don't turn them completely off. Turning your phone off is a deliberate act. It's a statement. It says, I do not want to be reached. I do not want there to be a record of anyone trying to reach me. I am checking out of my life for a while. Who does that? People who are doing something they don't want the most important person in their life to know about. People who are creating an alibi, not in retrospect, but in real time. The pieces clicked into place with the sickening finality of a coffin lid closing. The lie about the event. The group of 10+ men where she was the only girl. The 5 hours of a dead phone. The month of hiding it. And then the guilt. The guilt was the key that unlocked it all. Why feel guilt to the point of tears? I had seen her lie before about small things and she'd been defensive or annoyed. I had never seen her display that kind of soul-deep, racking guilt. That wasn't the guilt of a simple lie. That was the guilt of a profound betrayal. The level of her emotional distress was wildly disproportionate to the story she had told me. She wasn't crying because she had hung out with friends. She was crying because something happened during that hangout that shattered whatever moral code she had. She wasn't crying for me. She was crying for herself, because she had done something she couldn't take back, and the secret was eating her up inside. I sat there in the silent library, the textbook open in front of me, but I wasn't seeing the words. I was seeing a highlight reel of our entire relationship, re-edited and rescored with this new, terrible soundtrack. Every instance of her distance, every secret text, every flimsy excuse was now cast in a sinister new light. I believe she may have had a sexual rendezvous. The thought, which had been so impossible, so unthinkable before, now felt like the only logical conclusion, the only explanation that fit all the facts. The only thing that could justify the elaborate deception, the dead phone, and the soul-crushing month-long guilt. Or maybe something way lighter that she still felt too guilty of, that she couldn't keep it to herself as it ate her up. Perhaps. Maybe it wasn't the worst-case scenario. Maybe she just got drunk and made out with someone. Maybe there was just heavy flirting and inappropriate touching. But did it matter? Did the specific act change the fundamental equation of the betrayal? She had made a choice to lie, to put herself in that situation, to turn off her phone, to shut me out, to deceive me for a month, and to only confess out of a selfish need to alleviate her own guilt, giving me a watered-down, insulting version of the truth. The specifics were irrelevant. The betrayal was absolute. The flashbang had deafened me to all of her future excuses and blinded me to the version of her I had so desperately wanted to believe in. Staring at the page on cognitive dissonance, I realized I had been the textbook case. I held two contradictory beliefs. I love and trust my girlfriend, and my girlfriend's actions are deeply suspicious and hurtful. And to reduce the stress of that contradiction, I had chosen to discard my own perceptions, to twist reality to fit my preferred narrative. I had been lying to myself more than she had ever lied to me. The world came rushing back in. The quiet hum of the library's ventilation, the scratching of a pen on paper from the next table, the scent of old books and dust, but everything was different. The color had drained from my world, leaving only the stark black and white of the truth. She ain't it. The thought was so simple, so clear. It cut through all the confusion, all the emotional turmoil, all the justifications and rationalizations. It was over. I had to get out. Not just for my sanity, but for my survival. The walk from the library back to my dorm room was the longest walk of my life. Every step felt heavy, like I was wading through mud. The flashbang in my mind had subsided, leaving behind a deafening silence and a landscape of ruin. I saw our entire 2-year relationship laid out before me like a fallen city, and I could finally see that the foundations had been rotten from the very start. The decent beginning wasn't decent at all. It was just the period where her manipulation was more subtle and my naivety was at its peak. Every argument that ended with my apology, every time I'd swallowed my feelings to keep the peace, every red flag I had so diligently ignored, it all coalesced into a single, undeniable truth. I had not been in a partnership. I had been a hostage to my own fear of loneliness. I got to my room and sat on the edge of my bed, just staring at the wall. There was no rage, no fire of anger. That would come later. In that moment, all I felt was a profound, hollow emptiness. It was the feeling of realizing you've been living in a dream and have just woken up to a cold and unfamiliar reality. The person I thought I loved didn't exist. She was a character I had co-created with her, a projection of my own hopes and needs. The real person was a stranger, someone capable of a level of deceit that I couldn't even comprehend. I thought about confronting her. I played the scene out in my head a dozen times. Me laying out all the evidence like a prosecutor, the lie, the phone, the guilt, the 10 guys. Her either crying and confessing everything or more likely flying into a rage, turning it all around on me, calling me crazy, pathetic, and insecure for daring to question her. And what would be the point? What could she possibly say that would change anything? If she admitted it, it would just be more pain. If she denied it, she would just be lying again, insulting my intelligence and cementing the fact that she had zero respect for me. A confrontation was pointless. There is no winning an argument with a liar. There is no closure to be found in the words of a manipulator. The only victory was to walk away, to refuse to play the game anymore. The realization was liberating. I didn't need a confession from her. The truth wasn't something she held and could grant me. It was something I had finally allowed myself to see. My reality no longer depended on her version of it, and in that moment I snapped back. It was a literal snapping sound in my head, the sound of a tension cable that had been stretched to its limit for 2 years finally breaking. I snapped back into myself, into the person I was before he got lost in the fog of her toxicity. I realized she ain't it, and I had to leave. I didn't text her, I didn't call her. I waited until I knew she would be in her apartment that evening. I walked over, my heart a cold, steady drum in my chest. There was no fear, no hesitation, just a quiet, resolute purpose. She opened the door with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Hey, you," she said, leaning in for a kiss. I turned my head so it landed on my cheek. Her smile faltered. "What's wrong?" she asked, the familiar defensive edge already creeping into her voice. I stepped inside but didn't move any further into the room. I just stood there by the door. "We're done, Sarah," I said. The words were simple, unadorned. They hung in the air between us, stark and final. Her face went through a rapid series of emotions, confusion, then annoyance, then a flicker of panic. "What are you talking about?" she scoffed. "Is this because I couldn't hang out last night? My God, you are so needy sometimes." It was the same script, the same tired tactic of flipping the blame, but for the first time it had no effect on me. The words just bounced off the newfound armor of my certainty. "No," I said, my voice calm and even. "It's not about last night, it's about everything. It's about the lies and the manipulation and the fact that I don't even know who you are anymore. And I don't think I ever did. I didn't bring up the Sunday. I didn't bring up the guys or the phone. It was my truth, my realization, and I didn't owe her an explanation that she would only twist and use against me. She was an expert at debating the details to distract from the fundamental truth. I wasn't going to give her any details to debate. This wasn't a negotiation. It was a notification. The panic in her eyes grew. She saw that her usual tricks weren't working. "So that's it. You're just throwing 2 years away. Because of what? Because you're in a bad mood." And then came the tears. Not the gut-wrenching, guilty sobs I had witnessed before, but calculated crocodile tears designed to elicit sympathy and make me feel guilty. The old me would have folded instantly, rushing to comfort her, apologizing for making her cry. But the new me just watched, feeling nothing but a distant sense of pity. Pity for her, for being so trapped in her own webs of deceit that she couldn't have a single honest interaction. And pity for the boy who had spent 2 years believing those tears were real. "I'm not throwing them away," I said, my voice still quiet. "I'm learning from them, and I've learned that I deserve better than this." I turned and walked out the door. I didn't look back. I heard her call my name, her voice cracking, but I just kept walking. With every step I took away from her apartment, I felt lighter. It was like I had been carrying a 100-pound weight on my back for 2 years and had just set it down. The pain was immense, of course. The grief for the time I had lost, for the love I thought I had, was a physical ache in my chest. But underneath the pain, there was a feeling I hadn't experienced in a very long time. Hope. The hope of a future where I didn't have to apologize for my own feelings. The hope of a relationship built on mutual respect and honesty. The hope of finding myself again. The weeks that followed were hard. She tried everything to pull me back in: angry texts, sad voicemails, messages through friends about how heartbroken she was. But the spell was broken. I saw it all for what it was: not love, but a desperate attempt to regain control. I blocked her number. I focused on my studies, reconnected with the friends I had neglected, and slowly, piece by piece, I started to rebuild my life. I learned to trust my own gut, to recognize red flags for what they are, not as invitations to fix someone, but as warnings to save myself. That relationship was a painful 2-year lesson, but it was a necessary one. It taught me that the most important relationship you will ever have is the one you have with yourself, and that you should never let anyone, no matter how much you think you love them, disrespect that relationship. It taught me that real love doesn't require you to shrink yourself, to silence your voice, or to apologize for your own truth. It taught me how to see people for who they truly are, not for who I wish they would be. And that is a lesson that is worth any price. If you've made it this far, I'd love to hear from you. What moment in your life made you see someone for who they truly were? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to Reddit Whispers, where the real stories get told.